you doing? Ben here from Gwinear Angling, and welcome to the Gwinear Guide to Newquay Headland. So Newquay Headland is probably the town's most famous fishing mark, and there's a really good reason for that. It's produced specimen fish of an enormous variety over the years. In fact, it's probably easier to go through what you can't catch on Newquay Headland rather than what you can. Literally anything could show up out here, and it's always capable of throwing up a surprise. As you go further out towards the tip of the headland, the tide run increases, and it always runs right to left here, whether it's flooding or ebbing, so bear that in mind. The water does get deeper as you go further out, but it never reaches those really tremendous depths that you get off some Cornish rock marks. It's always pretty manageable. Of course, with the increased tide run, you get more fish like smoothhounds, ray and codlin when they're about, the more tide-loving species. As you come further back inside, you'll get more of the smaller sort of fish like flatfish, gurnards. We get small black bream here in the summer, that sort of thing. You can find mackerel, scad and garfish all the way along the headland, and you can fish for those in a variety of methods too. That's one great thing about the headland. It lends itself to a multi-method approach. You can fish on the bottom, you can fish afloat, you can lure fish, you can feather, and you're going to have good odds of success with all those different methods really. It's one of the great strengths of this place is it really lends itself to all abilities of angler, all methods. It's just a great area for shore fishing. Okay, now you know a bit more about the headland as a general area, let's start working through some of the marks out here. We're going to start down this end and work our way right out to the tip at High Place. Let's get cracking. So across the way there underneath the Atlantic Hotel is a mark called Rocket Pole. It's a really nice mark for lure fishing for bass over low water. In fact, it's quite nice conditions right now. It's also a good mark for garfish in the autumn as well. I don't know why, but they really seem to like bottling in up there, and you can have a really good time fishing for them with a float or spinning. So a good little mark to keep in your back pocket, that one. You can also fish it over high water. It does produce flatfish and things like that too. Handy little mark. So the flat platform of rock you can see behind me down there, it's one of my old wintertime favourites. I don't know if it's got a name, I've never learned it if it has, but I used to like dropping in there when it was too rough or too busy to get out the end. And I've had some really nice mixed bags off there, like some good whiting, pout, dogs, rocklin, that sort of thing. Also sneak the odd codlin out of there too, so it's one I'm quite fond of. There's rough ground up to about 50, 60 yards out, and you'll need a fairly decent cast to clear that comfortably if you want to fish on the clean, so worth bearing in mind. Of course, you can fish on the rough as well, and you can get the odd strap off there, rocklin, that sort of thing. In the summer, it's a good little wrasse mark. It does produce those, and it's great for feathering too. There's a rock pool down there that I've seen full of mackerel and scad a few times, so they can definitely show in numbers up there, and you can bag up. Nice, comfortable little mark. Okay, so we're at the top of the old Lifeboat Slip now, sort of around the middle of the headland, and there's quite a few little rocky ledges and platforms that you can get on around here. They all offer much the same fishing wise. This area is characterised by not having too much tide, so you can fish with like estuary rods or carp rods and 2 and 3 ounces of lead, and you'll be just fine on the bottom, especially in the summer when the sea's not as rough. Of course, with a reduced tide flow, you don't get so much of your glamour species, you know, your smoothhounds and ray and that. But you can still put together a nice little mixed bag of fish here. I remember coming here as a kid and catching gurnard and little black bream and nice mackerel, having a lot of fun. And that's what I'd turn to this area to. If you wanted to bring your family down, that sort of thing, catch a few fish, and it's relatively safe and comfortable. Nice little area. There's scuddy ground too, so you always stand a chance of a wrasse and maybe even a decent one, conger, that sort of thing. So don't be surprised if anything turns up here. Okay, so below me is a mark called Lenard's Rock, and it's a mark that I've always enjoyed fishing. It's a little bit off the tide still, but you can find that tide with a longer cast, and that's an approach that served me well in the past. I quite often like to fish here with a multi-hook rig and just see what turns up. You get all sorts off here. If you find that tide, you can still pick up your sort of smoothhound and codlin and that sort of thing, so you often get a nice surprise. Of course, it still is good for your whiting and your bass and gurnard. And it used to be absolutely amazing for flatfish. That's how it got its name. A guy called Lenard used to fish here, and he put together some absolutely incredible bags of plaice. But these days I found the plaice quite difficult to come by, although occasionally quite often by accident someone catches an absolute whacker, so the potential is there if you've got the patience. Definitely be wary of, there's quite a lot of reefy ground in here, and if you're bringing in a better fish, you really want to give it the heat in those last few moments, because I've lost 1 or 2 good fish here as they've just gone straight into the reef, and that's been that. It's quite sort of pinnacly and snaggy, so avoid that if you can. Of course, to the right here is where the old sewer pipe used to let out, and it used to be amazing for mullet, but of course now the sewer pipe is gone and there's not as much mullet food there, so you still do get mullet in there though, so it's always worth a look if you're in the area and you're interested in having a go for one. There's usually a few small ones knocking around there, but they are quite catchable when you find them. Okay, so I'm just on my way to the outer marks, but I thought I'd stop to show you this bit here. There's a little concrete platform in there that quite a lot of people like. It's a really good one if you've got your kids with you, or you've got reduced mobility, that sort of thing. It's a nice, safe, comfortable platform to fish from, and you can still catch some nice fish there too. All right, so now I'm stood at the top of a mark called Low Place, an absolutely fantastic mark, especially for the more experienced anglers among you out there. Produces a lot of different kinds of fish, but it does come with a few challenges as well. In close, it's sort of, you can get a bit of rough ground. There's some boulders to the right of me here that you can catch straps and rockling on, some wrasse. But for the main part, it's sand out to as far as you can cast. You get quite a bit of tide off here, and the further you cast, the more of that tide you're going to find, and quite often the bigger the fish that's going to result in. So it definitely seems to favour those kind of anglers. But there's fish at all distances. So I like to cast from this sort of grassy area here. I find I can get a better wind up there, get further out in that tide. I also like to fish at the top here in this sort of shaly section. Some people like to go down onto the mushroom of rock down there, but I don't like that. I find it uncomfortable, and sometimes, especially in the winter when the sea's rough, and these marks do fish well when it's rough, that will cop it quite badly, and I want no part of that at all. So I would recommend, if there's any kind of sea, stay at the top here and keep safe. You can always go down there to land any big fish you catch that you can't lift. There is room down the side of the mark to take them all the way down to the water's edge in the little cove down here, and you can comfortably get down and retrieve those fish. Don't try and get down the front here, it's really not worth it. The sea does come in there, and you're really taking an unnecessary risk. So stay safe, walk any bigger fish you get round into that cove and land them there. Like all the other marks out here, they're good for mackerel and scad and garfish, and quite often you will find that there is a lot of mackerel fishermen on this area, but if you can get on it, it still produces quite well in the summer. It's a good mark for smoothhounds. You get some nice ray here. I remember coming down here once and a bloke was fast into a sunfish of about 30 pound that he played for about half an hour before eventually getting broken off by it. But like all the spots in the headland, this one has the potential to throw up those kind of surprises. Okay, so parking wise on the headland, you've got 2 choices. This is the Town Head car park. This used to be run by the council, but now they've farmed it out to a private parking company, and the rates and restrictions have increased as a result. Right now you can't park here between midnight and 5 in the morning, which is an unfortunate oversight that will hopefully be corrected in the future. But either way, it's very expensive to park here, and I would avoid it if you can, in favour of parking in the Dane Road Council car park at the top by the Atlantic Hotel and walking down. The rates are much more reasonable there, and it's free to park in the winter. Okay, so now I'm stood above High Place. This is the jewel in the crown of the fishing out here, I would say. It's a very famous mark, and one that's produced an awful lot of specimen fish over the years, and lots of very good fishing. Lots of stories about this one too. That might be something for another time. Unlike Low Place, which you can fish at all stages of the tide, although the first 2 hours of the ebb run pretty hard, the first 2 hours of the ebb here run extremely hard, and you will not hold bottom with any lead, like even a 10-ounce gripper, and you will inevitably scoot into this finger of reef that runs on the left out to sea on the left hand side here. Some people don't mind that, and they will actually fish to sort of nestle their gear into the side of the reef and pick up nice fish that way. But if you're gonna fish like that, you're gonna experience quite a bit of tackle loss too, so be aware of that. So you get your smoothhounds, you get your ray, codlin, you get bass here, there's been massive congers off here in the past. Really just about anything, flatfish, gurnard. It's a really good mark for mackerel, and But bear in mind, one of the features of this mark, these days especially, is that the seals absolutely love to hang around here and take anything you hook off your line. So when you see them, just be aware of that. And if you are reeling in a fish and you see one, whine like hell. So hopefully you'll get it. But yeah, another thing that this mark, and generally this little area here, and just further out, past going towards Cribber Reef is good for, is wrasse. You get some really nice wrasse here. There's been some absolute monsters over the years, and they respond quite well to lure fishing, particularly over high tide, but I didn't tell you that. So casting wise, you can catch fish at all distances here, especially on the flood when the tide flow isn't so strong. Distance casting can pay. If you cast out diagonally towards Porth and Watergate there, and let your gear trundle around on the tide, that can be a really good tactic for picking up your ray and your flatfish. You can fish multi-hook rigs here on the bottom, you can float fish, you can feather, you can lure fish. It's really a mark that accommodates a lot of styles, but there is that element where it is quite risky, it suits the more experienced angler, and really I would advise against fishing here on your own, like another pair of eyes or 2 pairs of eyes is definitely a benefit out here, especially when it comes to landing fish. So the mark runs diagonally that way down to the sea, and you can get down to the water's edge if you need to land a fish that you can't lift. But be aware you want someone watching you at all times, and one feature of this mark is that the swells can run past here rather than into it. They'll run from left to right along the face of the mark, and they can really catch you out if you're not careful. I know a few people that have had waves come right over the top of here and absolutely turn this place into an island. So especially in rough weather, be very, very careful here. And that is another thing about this mark. It can fish really well in the colder months of the year when it is rough. But if you're going to step to that challenge, make sure you have the experience, make sure you have an experienced buddy, and be careful at all times because this mark is a potential killer. So when it comes to setting up and where to fish, a lot of people like to fish right at the top here, and they'll even cast off that rock there. I find that incredibly sketchy. I like to fish somewhere around the middle here if I can. And if I want a longer cast, I'll quite often go to the back of the mark where there's a bit of a drop off and you can really wind up a cast out there. I don't tend to like casting from anywhere down on the mark unless I'm only chucking about 30, 50 yards out, in which case just a little overhead cast is fine. If you want to wind up a bigger cast, you can even come to the top here if you've got head for heights. There's a fair amount of room here and you can really wind up a big cast. So another thing to be aware of on this mark particularly is that the rocks are quite treacherous, especially when they're wet. More than one very experienced angler has had a nasty fall here, so my advice would be if you're going to fish this mark, wear spiked boots, take extra care in the wet, and take your time getting up and down any sort of inclines or declines because it can be pretty slippy. So, a couple of quick tips regarding tide out here on the headland. If you're after bass, and you often find that the best time is over the low water. The water's at its shallowest. The bass really seem to like that shallower water, especially when there's a bit of surf running. It really seems to get them excited and you stand a good chance of catching a few then if they're around. If you're after your other stuff like your ray, smooth hounds, codlin, mackerel, that sort of thing, then concentrate your sessions over that high water period and you generally won't go too far wrong there. So I hope you've enjoyed this Gwinear Guide to Newquay Headland. Really is a top area and has a lot to offer for anglers of all abilities. If you've got any questions, just pop them in the comments below and one of us will get to it as soon as we can. If you enjoyed this video, why not check out another in our Gwinear Guides series. We'd really appreciate it if you like the videos and subscribe to the channel. If you're in the area and looking to do some fishing, come into the shop for the latest up-to-date catch news, fresh bait and quality tackle. We'd love to see you there. Cheers.